Hi everyone. One of the things I firmly believe is that no matter who you are, everyone has a story. I believe that no matter who you are, not only do you have a story, but your story is powerful. And one of the main reasons your story has power is because it tells you who you are. You know, we're always changing and we grow and mature, but actually our stories shape who we are and who we are becoming. And I think that's the power of our stories. I think it's the power of my story. It's the power of your story. But it's not just your story telling you who you are. It's the bigger stories around us as well. People want to tell you their story, hoping to shape you. So it could be culture or government, your boss, marketing companies, of course, your family, your parents, and all of these entities. They have a story that they're telling, hoping to shape you, hoping to influence you. And some of those stories are very helpful and others less so. Actually, I kind of in the same vein, I also think that God has a story. And I think that God's story tells us who we are meant to be as humans. And maybe you go, oh yeah, I've heard this before, but maybe it might surprise you. So let me read to you from a verse in the New Testament, 1 Peter 2 verse 9. And it says this: "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light." And, you know, just commenting on that verse, there's a few things in that verse that they're all encouraging actually, but I want to focus on one of the things. And so in many ways that verse is talking about identity. Who are we? And it uses this concept of a royal priesthood. And I really want to just zoom in to this idea of being a priest. You know, being a priest, it's not just for men in robes, which is fine for men in robes to be priests, but it's for them. But it's also, but this concept of being priestly is actually meant to be part of everyone's story. 1 Peter 2:9 wasn't just written to men in robes. It was written to men, it was written to women, it was written to slaves, it was written to children. And so it's for them to be part of this royal priesthood. And so I believe that the story of God, the biblical story, the whole idea of being priestly is central to that story. The whole idea of being priestly is central to the idea of, to the story of humanity. The story of us is a story of our priestliness. So what does that mean? Well, let me read to you from the book of Genesis, the very first chapter of the very first book of the Bible, Genesis 1:26-28. "Then God said, 'Let us make mankind,' or humanity, 'in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground.' So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, 'Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground.'" And so, you know, we can think quite often actually of the ones who wear robes, or the ones who lead churches, or the ones who are part of, you know, kind of officiating at religious ceremonies. We can think of them as priests. But according to the biblical narrative, all humans are priestly. Humanity was made for the purpose of standing between two parties. We are, as humans, part of creation, but we're also the only part of creation that has the image of God. That means that we are uniquely qualified. Humans are uniquely qualified to stand between God and the rest of creation. And as the Bible develops its story, Genesis 1 and then Genesis 2, where we have the concept of the Garden of Eden, humanity are the ones who stand between two spaces. You know, priests represent two parties, and for humans it's between God and the rest of creation. But priests also, and humans as priests, they bridge two spaces. Eden was God's dwelling place on earth. It's where heaven met earth, and it's where God met with his priests. So this idea of being priestly, it's really this idea of mediating, of standing in between, of bridging two places. And going along with that concept, priests are always representing one group of people to another. As humans, I think we are always representing something bigger than ourselves. such as our parents, our school, our suburb, our culture. And today, I suppose I really want to talk about this idea of how we represent God to creation and creation back to God. This idea of humans having a priestly identity. And in that representation, in that mediation between two parties, in that bridging between two spaces, how humans are called to cultivate relationships and to bring meaning to whatever roles they happen to have, whether they're typically spiritual roles or they're typically secular roles. Kind of want to break down that distinction a little bit today. Let me go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. So God created mankind, humanity, in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. So God's story begins with his creation, where he places physical representations of his being, the creatures who carry his image, us, in a garden meant for flourishing. And actually, the first chapter of the Bible, it's not so much concerned about how old the earth is or anything like that. In terms of its literary structure, the first chapter of the Bible follows the same structure as other ancient Near Eastern texts that describe temple building. So if we're to take that kind of clue of the genre of Genesis chapter 1, basically it tells a story of God building the universe as a temple, which he beautifies and populates with living symbols. Symbols, celestial symbols and living symbols, the sun, the stars, the moon, different kinds of creatures. And then, after beautifying and populating his temple, the universe, he places his images in it. He places us in it. And actually, the Hebrew word used for image, that we carry the image of God inside of us, is exactly the same word translated in other parts of the Hebrew Bible as idol. And so God creates a temple and he puts his idols in it. His idols that represent him, these little living statues in a way. I mean, more than statues, but trying to get this idea that idols are meant to represent different kinds of gods, right? And humans are meant to represent. We're meant to be idols of God. We're meant to carry his image. We're meant to represent him in his temple. And so our function as humans is to continually remind others of their creator. And we do this part of our function, of our calling, of our design. We do this well when we actually spend time getting to know our creator and his heart. So to represent God well, which is what we're made for, we're meant to spend time with God, much like a lawyer would spend time with a client in order to understand how best to represent them. We don't do religious things like reading our Bible and praying just to tick off a list of good deeds or to avoid punishment. I think, and this is how I try to live out my spirituality, I think we should pray, I think we should read the Bible, amongst a whole other host of spiritual activities. We should do those things to develop a deep relationship with God, getting to know whose image we carry. Whose image am I made in? I want to get to know this being. I want to spend time with this being. I want to represent this being well, if that is what I was made for. And so we should read, I think, or there's an invitation to read and pray the Bible and whatever other spiritual things that we do to develop a deep relationship with God, getting to know whose image we carry, whose character we represent, and allowing his priorities to shape ours so that we more clearly represent him. The image becomes a higher resolution, goes from 144p all the way up to 4K. All right, Genesis 1:28. Genesis 1:28 says, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. And so, there's a bit of like language which it sounds maybe a little bit harsh, this concept of subduing the earth. It's actually been kind of tainted by people who, in the name of God, have gone to war and, dominated and exploited the environment. But this concept of subduing the earth, it's actually, it shouldn't be taken that way towards domination and exploitation, because God's commission has always come from his heart to steward creation and to cultivate its beauty. So as priests, we're not only represent God to creation, but we also represent creation back to God, allowing him to renew, restore, and fix what's been broken. And so I'm talking about creation as in like the natural creation, but I'm also talking about other human beings as well. And just like we need to know God to represent him, we also need to know creation to represent creation back to God. There's two parties whenever a priest is involved. There's two spaces. How can we represent people to God if we don't know them? So there's a temptation in religious circles regarding people who don't follow Jesus to treat them with kind of fear and suspicion, or maybe this desire to subjugate and dominate and subdue them. But actually, spending time with them, getting to know them, being friends with them, sitting around a table, having a meal with them, enables us to really see them and know them. And I suspect that often we don't flourish in our priestly identity because we don't know the world around us, nor the people we're representing. We're too tempted to hate the world around us. We're too tempted to be afraid of the world around us, instead of getting to know the world around us and fulfilling our priestly duties of representing them back to God. You know, it's often much easier to spend time with God than it is to spend time with people who don't follow him. But as a priest, we're called to do both. So Genesis 1:26 says this, "Then God said, let us make mankind, humanity, in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule." And I think that once the concept of this idea of, fill the earth and subdue it, this idea of subduing and ruling are seen through the lens of stewardship, which is just another way of being priestly, another way to word being priestly. If we see subduing and ruling through the lens of stewardship or being priestly, then I think we begin to see opportunities to cultivate beauty, to cultivate life and healing and potential in all arenas of life. Because if we have kind of a view that it's just the priests are just the leaders in the church, then we can fall into this trap that being priestly is just about a Sunday service, or being priestly is related to baptizing babies, or dedicating babies and baptizing adults, or these stereotypically spiritual contexts. But actually, we're called to be priestly everywhere, and it's not just for church leaders; it's for everyone. It's for all humans. So I think that, in fact, our workplaces can become sacred spaces where we can live out our priestly role. And I think that this concept of humans having a priestly identity, that God's story informs who we're meant to be, our identity, I think that brings meaning to our work. Actually, our neighborhoods have the potential to be modern day Gardens of Eden, places where God meets with his image bearers. I mean, I pray that would happen for my neighborhood, that it could be a modern day Garden of Eden. Ministry is no longer seen as something that happens just within the church walls or by certain anointed people. If we lay hold of this concept that all humans have the potential to live out a priestly identity, and that those who follow Jesus have started that journey of growing into their priestliness. I believe that we are called to be priestly everywhere and all the time. Not as something that burdens us, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, but something that sustainably flows from our identity. That's something that actually flows from what we were made for. It's so much easier to be who we're called to be. And if we recognize that we're called to be priestly, then I think rather than doing things for the sake of being more holy or spiritual than someone else, this kind of comparative sense, we just be who we are. And then it stops being a burden, but it flows from our being. I believe that as we image God, investing in relationships, cultivating, digging deep, being present, and presenting those around us back to God, that we can all increase in our own personal flourishing, that our neighborhoods can increase in their flourishing, and that we can grow, and that those around us have a chance to grow also in their priestly identity. Those are my thoughts. I don't know what you think, but I invite you to comment. And so I've got some questions here, and I'd love for you to discuss these into some little groups, and maybe you can give me some feedback. But first set of questions, what do you think it means to be an image or idol of God in the world today? One thing to be an image of God in the Garden of Eden, but what about today? And if Eden is pictured as a temple and we're the priests in that, what would that mean for how we see the natural world around us, our relationships, our work? Another set of questions. Priests represent God to creation and creation back to God. Now, that's what I've been saying anyway. You might disagree with that. Let me know. But in your daily life, which of those two roles is easier and which is harder? Representing God or representing creation? And why? And can you think of a time when you've seen someone represent God like really well in an ordinary setting like the workplace or family or community? And what made it effective? Often we go, oh, that was a great preaching, that was great leading of a prayer meeting. But what about when someone was priestly in a non-spiritual, kind of non-churchy context? Because I think that's what we're made for. I'd love to see how other people have done it effectively. Final set of questions. How can the idea that priestly identity flows from who we are make this calling feel freeing instead of burdensome? Oh, you mean I've got to be a priest? I wonder if we add in this idea that it's part of our identity. How does that help, if at all? And maybe thinking about your own sphere of influence, what is one practical way this week or moving forward that you could cultivate flourishing in your sphere of influence as part of your priestly calling? So there's some questions. Hopefully it provokes some discussion. Feel free to follow the rabbit trail wherever it goes, but I'd love to hear some feedback. All right. Thanks, guys.